Okay, welcome to this video in which we'll review how to open up the starter code files that you'll be provided for all the homeworks and also for the labs. Then we'll take a look at the file structure of the starter code so you understand what each part is doing and what you'll need to edit. Then we'll take a look at starting this file. So that's what we'll do in this video. So first thing you want to do is you want to download the zip file off the website. It should be linked very close to this video, so it should be easy to find, and you can download this exact version so you can follow along with this tutorial. First thing you want to do is you want to extract the zip file into a normal folder. This will differ on Mac and Linux, but you should be able to Google this if you don't know how to do it. And then we'll have an extracted folder, which we'll want to open in VS Code. Okay, so let's open up VS Code. And then we'll open this folder that we just extracted. So it's on our desktop. There we go. So now let's take a look at the file structure of this folder. So this is the file structure that all the starter code will have. Right now it's intimidating, there's a lot of different components, but we'll simplify and you'll really only have to focus on a few of them. So let's kind of go bottom up here. The zip.js file you won't ever need to use, but this file exists. At the end, you'll see it used to turn your code into a submission to the correct format that will allow you to upload it to Gradescope so we can grade it. tsconfig.json is something that TypeScript is going to use so that it has the correct configuration that we'll use in this class. You don't have to worry about this file either. Next is package and packagelog.json. These are really going to be important for Node to understand what's going on, what scripts are available, and we'll review some of these scripts in a minute. And it'll also tell your installation what things need to be installed, and we'll look at that soon too. The next file up is jest.config.json. This file is the configuration file for the testing framework Jest, which we'll be using to write our tests. So what's important to know is that this is another configuration file that you don't need to touch. Similarly, prettier.rc is a file for the formatter so that your code looks pretty before we submit it. ESLint is the configuration for lint, for ESLint, and ESLint is basically a linter for JavaScript that enforces some code guidelines and some code rules. For example, you can't have a bunch of unused variables flying around. It'll underline that. So those rules are set in here, but again, you do not need to touch this. Next is this gitignore file here, and what this does is it tells Git, in case you're using Git, and we'll learn more about what Git is and how to use it later in the semester, but it essentially tells your computer what files should not get uploaded to Git, what files should stay local in this directory. Finally, we have two folders. The top folder is .vscode. This is just some configuration for the VS Code, and we don't really need to look at that, but we'll see in a future video how to use the debugger, and that's inside of here. So that configuration is determined inside of this folder. So that leaves one folder that you really have to worry about. It's the source folder, so we'll expand that. And usually you'll see this have 3 files. Sometimes it has more, but most of the time it's going to have 3 files. It's always going to have a main.ts file, and it's always at least going to have one test file and one, in this case, since this is a setup project, it's called setup.ts. But it'll be called different things based on the homework. So inside of these files, the main.ts file is basically a file where you can write anything you want if you want to just try something out. This is usually not going to be graded. The programming tasks you're going to be asked to implement will be implemented inside of setup.ts. So this is where you'll implement all the functions required for homework. Inside of setup.ts, setup.test.ts is where you'll implement all your tests for the code that you write inside of setup.ts. It's important to note that testing is a big part of this course, so you're going to get really familiar with it. But for now, we're going to start off with including some tests, and then you're going to write some others. Later on in the semester, you're going to be asked to implement all your own tests. Testing will also be part of your grade, and that'll be covered in the syllabus. So before we start into coding, before we dive in, we have to do one thing. And you have to do this every time you open up a homework or a lab for the first time. The first thing we always want to do is open up a new terminal and run npm install. So what does npm install do? So if we look back into the package.json file, we'll see that there's a number of development dependencies and sometimes dependencies that we'll need to install before we're able to use and run our code. So this includes TypeScript, TS Node, Jest, which is our testing framework, Prettier, which is our formatter, and a number of other things. Usually you don't have to worry about what these are. It's just important to know that by running npm install, we're installing all of these. So now where do they get installed? Well, that's a good question too. They get installed into this node modules folder, which you'll never have to open. You can see there's a lot of things in here, which we really don't care about, but it's good to know that when we run npm install, it's going to look inside of our package.json folder and then install these dependencies into the node modules folder so that Node can use them when we're running the code. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense. So now let's start with how do I run the code, right? That's a very important thing for us to know. So let's open up this main.ts file and let's see how we run this. So first, let's take a look at the structure of this file. Let's close the terminal for now. We don't need it right now. At the top, we can see we import a number of functions from setup.js, which is going to correspond to the setup.ts file. So we're importing these functions, which are defined right here in the setup.ts file. Then console.log is how we print things to the console in JavaScript or in TypeScript. You've probably seen in Python, you just use print, and in Java, you can use system.out.println. Here we use console.log, but it's the same basic idea. Then I'll let you all take a second to familiarize yourself with the code. So in your local version that you downloaded and hopefully have opened up to this point, please make sure you understand kind of what's going on here. We're calling functions, passing parameters into the functions inside of setup.ts. And then sometimes we get things back, sometimes they return void. So please take a second to look through that and understand. Assuming that you've done that, let's see, how can we run this code, right? That's a very important thing for us to do. So the easiest way is let's open up a new terminal. And you'll notice that the terminal is at this top level. And then we can run npm run start. npm run start is a script that we've defined, and I'll show you where it's defined in a second. But essentially, npm run start will always run the code inside of the main.ts file. So you can see that we have ran this file and we're printing a couple things, right? First, up here, we're printing this message. We're printing the result of calling the hello world function. And then these two functions, if you look inside of setup.ts, will also print something. So that accounts for these first 4 lines. We'll look at these 2 lines later in the other 2 parts of this video. But for now, we can see that we're printing these strings that we expect. So that's great. We know how to run code now. Let's have a look at what other scripts are available to us to use. And these will be very helpful for you. So let's look inside package.json, which is where all these scripts are defined. You saw that we just used the start script, which allowed us to run the main file. We can see that the test script will run Jest, and we'll take a closer look at testing in a future video, so we're not going to dive into that now. The format and lint scripts. Format will just check your formatting. If you run format check, if you want to fix your formatting, you can run format. Lint will show you linting issues, and lint fix will try to automatically fix many of these linting issues. You really won't have to use the build command all that often, but it exists in case you want to build your project into the JavaScript version. And builds a submission, we'll look at that in one of the future videos as well. It's just important to know that these live here and this is where they are defined. You won't have to edit these, but now you know where they are and where they are defined. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to take a look at using the debugger to debug our code. And then we'll also take a look at testing, writing your own function, writing tests for that function, and potentially debugging some tests, and also submitting up to Gradescope. So stay tuned for that.